And we are live. Welcome back to another episode of The Morning Joe. Today is August 7th, 2020. We generally don't do these on Friday, but we are not having our normal daily MI Live show today because we have a boatload of work we need to catch up on and get done before the weekend. So we are actually rolling with a Morning Joe show today. So today is actually going to be kind of an extended episode. We're going to be here to do some Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, please throw them at me. Just put them in the comments and we will get to them. So while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, I will provide some color commentary and also give you some updates into what's going on in the Macros Inc. world this week, all the exciting things. If it's clear yet, I have not showered. I got up to finish some work and have not showered and thought we'd just do a Morning Joe show. So that's what we're doing. Some updates. We do have a new blog. I don't know if you guys have seen that yet, but let me pull that up for you just in case you want me to show you what it's all about. It is from, oh gosh, I clicked the wrong button. It is from Tom Frankelmont, one of our Macros Inc. coaches. He was a moderator for a long time and was just promoted to a Macros Inc. coach. So he has an article called Intermittent Fasting and Fat Loss, where he walks through a little bit of intermittent fasting, how it works, kind of gives us an analogy on using your checking account. Tom says he imagines that he starts the month with $100,000 in savings. I need to live in Tom's world if that's the case, because that would be awesome. And then he talks about the effectiveness of intermittent fasting for losing fat. And then there's even a sweet little graph that kind of shows you the difference between normal eating and intermittent fasting eating. So go check that out. That is macrosinc.net/blog, or you can go to macrosinc.net/intermittent fasting and fat loss. I'll create a banner so you guys can see that real quick. Bang. So if you want to check out that article, go to macrosinc.net/intermittent fasting and fat loss with some hyphens between the words, because your web browser does not like empty characters. So yeah, go take a look at that. That's new. We also have several new podcast episodes up. If you guys have not checked out the podcast, you should go do that. Let me see if I can sign in and show you all of the exciting things that are going on the podcast. Let's share that screen so you can see all the new ones. Dun, dun, dun. All right, here we go. So this week we have does eating after 6 p.m. make you gain weight, and knee pain and biologicals for orthopedic issues. So those are two episodes that we recorded a little while ago, and now they are back on the podcast. So you can check those out on YouTube at macrosinc.net/YouTube, or you can check them out at macrosinc.net/podcast. So go take a look at those and dive into the Macros Inc. content. We should have beta testing of our app live very soon. We're trying to just finalize our Apple developer account, and you need like some crazy business information that we have to register for, like a DUNS number or something crazy like that. So we are working on getting all those things finalized so we can actually have beta testers. So we do have a couple questions coming in, so let's go ahead and answer those. Sarah asked, who's Morning Joe, and why is he always so awake first thing in the morning where you are? He's drinking coffee. That's why he's awake. This is just blocking my adenosine receptors. So I'm alive, awake, alert, enthusiastic. Live, awake, alert, enthusiastic. That's the coffee song we sing in our house. Actually, by we, I mean me, and it drives my wife nuts because she's also not a morning person. So Morning Joe is always awake first thing in the morning because he's drinking coffee. So next question. I am a type 2 diabetic who is diet controlled. I have led a low-carb lifestyle before it became so mainstream. When I do my macros, the carb intake always seems so high. It scares me to take the plunge and fully commit because I would never consume the amount it suggests. I tend to eat less than what's suggested. Do you have any insight on this? So there's a few answers to this question, and none of them are the best answers. They're all different options of answers that you can do for you. So if you find that for you having type 2 diabetes and having a more low carb approach to your diet is more beneficial for symptom management, I would say stick with that, right? If you're having good results and good success, I would say stick with that, right? It's a totally viable option. It may change your ability to do some high intensity exercise, but that's okay, right? You can, if you're getting good results, stick with that. Now, if you do want to work with a Macros Inc. coach, or you do want to just use our calculator and kind of try things on your own, we will adjust kind of standard normal recommendations to fit that, right? So if you're like, hey, I really just want to go lower carb because it helps with symptom management, and I've cleared it with my doctor, then we'll definitely provide options that are lower in carbohydrates and a little bit higher in fats. If you work with a coach, they will 100% do that with you as well, right? So it's not like, hey, these are the numbers our calculator will give you. You have to do this. That's kind of a starting point of the discussion. So that's the first piece and the first answer. The second answer is one of the things to consider is a few ways to answer the second piece. Dietary carbohydrates are not the primary problem. It's even when you have type 2 diabetes. Now, let me dive into this a little more in depth. So, when you have type 2 diabetes, your elevated blood glucose is a symptom of the disease, not a cause of the disease. So, generally speaking, in the most simplified terms, your elevated blood glucose comes from really three primary mechanisms. The first is you have peripheral insulin resistance. So you have insulin resistance in your skeletal muscle and other organs and other tissues that primarily arises from fatty acid accumulation. So you have too much fatty acids accumulating in your peripheral tissue with, we'll just say, your skeletal muscle because it's easy. And you have impaired fat metabolism. So your body's ability to metabolize fatty acids in your skeletal muscle is impaired when you have type 2 diabetes. And it's generally because you have too much stored. The cellular environment makes it harder to oxidize fatty acids. So you have an accumulation. You have a impaired ability to reduce that accumulation, and that causes insulin resistance. Now, that same process occurs in your liver. And what happens when it happens in your liver is your liver becomes insulin resistant, and insulin, when it's present, tells your liver to stop pumping glucose out into the rest of your body. So when you have insulin resistance in your skeletal muscle, you don't deposit glucose as well from your blood circulating. When you have it in your liver, you produce more sugar and you put it out into your body than normal. So you have an increased rate of appearance in your blood and a decreased rate of removal from your blood. Now, those are from kind of ectopic or excess fat deposits in different tissues in your body. So if we think about that, and then we go, okay, I'm going to have kind of an impaired fat metabolism, and I'm going to consume a very high fat diet, low carbohydrate. So the low carbohydrate approach may help you manage your blood sugar a little bit better on the day to day because you don't have these big excursions from consuming food. But that may not be the most effective way to actually address the root cause long term, right? It may actually slow down some of your ability to reduce ectopic fat accumulation. So something to consider. That doesn't mean you have to do either one. It's just something that you can kind of consider and take to a physician. Now, the biggest thing is as you lose body weight, the root cause, the ectopic fat accumulation, will decrease. So you'll improve all of your symptoms at all those levels. So that's kind of my very long, drawn out answer to that. Charisse McDonald asked, I don't know if I missed it or if you said, but what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting? Does it work? Is it useless? So intermittent fasting can work and it is not useless. But just making sure you understand exactly how and why it works. So the primary reason intermittent fasting works for weight loss is that it's a way to reduce overall caloric intake, right? So imagine if you can consume food from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., that's a large window that you can accumulate calories. Now, if you only eat from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., that's a very small window in which you can accumulate calories in your day. So really, it's kind of a way to truncate your feeding window and reduce your calorie intake by just reducing the amount of time in a day you can eat. And that's generally what happens. So when we see dietary studies where you compare intermittent fasting to other approaches, among the people with intermittent fasting who lose weight, it is just because they have kind of ad libitum, or like free eating. They just randomly, or not really randomly, but they unintentionally reduce total caloric intake in a given day. So that's generally how intermittent fasting works. Somebody asked, "Hey doc, since you have an extensive background in diabetes research, what can you tell us about its causes? I know it's a very complex issue that encompasses genetics, environmental factors, diet, etc. But can you tell us if the research points to any one major cause more than others? Is there generally one most underlying cause of diabetes?" Yeah. So just a brief color commentary on my background. So I did my PhD work was in essentially diabetes, where we looked at really how diet and exercise affect, basically result in a specific form of cardiovascular disease in diabetes. So we looked at actually how does food and exercise affect the molecular mechanisms of disease in diabetes in the heart. And then I did my fellowship I did my postdoc in very similar. So really the role of diet and specific nutrients in diabetes, in diabetic kidney disease. So and then I spent a year and some change as a faculty scientist doing the same thing. So I spent most of my research career on kind of the molecular mechanisms of diabetes as it associates to diet and exercise. So that's kind of a little bit about my background. So what do we know about root causes? So root causes of diabetes I just talked about them a little bit, but really what it comes down to is energy overload. That's the most simple, fundamental way I can describe it. Is you have a inappropriate accumulation of energy in the system, and that generally manifests as too much fat accumulation, because fat is the main form of energy storage in our body. That's the primary mechanistic cause. So all those things result in insulin resistance, and then the insulin resistance can cause some other issues downstream. Now, what causes the energy overload? There really appears to be three main things. Well, two main things that have a few different causes. So obviously it's a overconsumption of energy, so too much food intake and not enough physical activity. Now, each of those pieces are very different depending on where you live and when you live in time. So, for example, in the United States right now, really the two major reasons for developing obesity and then diabetes are a lack of physical activity that's associated with work. So our leisure time physical activity, so like our free time where we go to the gym and do structured exercise, is actually higher now than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, or even 40 years ago. Our work associated physical activity, so just having a physically demanding job, has dropped substantially. So if you think about how many hours a day we spend doing stuff, your work associated physical activity is generally a much larger caloric expenditure than your hour in the gym, right? So the offset of being a little more physically active in our free time for some people is not offset by the drastic reduction in physical activity or energy expenditure in your daily work. So that's a big one. And one of the first pieces of evidence that this was the case is actually, you can look it up. It's called the London Bus Study. And it was done by a researcher named Morris, and I think it was done in the 1950s. So basically, they looked at in the London bus underground, all the different public transports, they had conductors and they had drivers. So the conductors were, I think that was right, conductors and drivers, or whatever the exact terminology they used, but they had two people where they looked at the people who were they were taking the tickets and they were putting people on the bus. So they were always walking up and down the bus. So their job was just, they were moving around all day. And then they had the drivers who just sat all day. And the risk of cardiovascular disease as a result of obesity was substantially higher than people who just sat all day versus moved all day. So that was one of the first pieces of evidence that work-associated physical activity was important. The second piece on the energy intake is our food environment has changed so much that unless you're very intentional, your likelihood of over-consuming food is essentially 100%, just because calories are cheap, calories are everywhere, calories are convenient. I mean, I can get a 2,500 calorie pizza delivered to my house in 15 minutes, right? That's pretty difficult to try to avoid over-consuming food if that's the case. So those are kind of the primary underlying causes. Obesity is the number one risk factor for diabetes. And if you look up kind of BMI, risk of diabetes by BMI, the chart's like this. So it's pretty remarkable. And I do have a lecture that I give on diabetes that I'll probably give kind of as a public free lecture for the Macros Inc. audience at some point too. We have one more question before we wrap up for the day. So I think it's Siobhan asked, is there a potential to eat too much raw foods? Like, is there a point where you're trying to eat too much spinach? Yeah, you can absolutely eat too many raw foods. Any overconsumption of any type of food can cause problems. Spinach has, some specific problems where you can have too many oxalates, and some of those things like that can actually kind of result in kidney stones. If you're eating just raw foods, you're probably not getting enough protein. You're probably not getting enough like fish oil or vitamin D, or some of the fat soluble vitamins. So if you're eating basically only raw foods, you can run into some nutrient deficiencies, and then you can overconsume some of these phytochemicals that can cause things like kidney stones. So those are some of the things just to be careful of if you're eating, just tons of spinach. Also, if you're eating a lot of bagged spinach, you'll probably end up at some point getting food poisoning like I did when I was putting bagged spinach in my smoothies every morning. And I ended up getting food poisoning from that once. And then I never did it. I never put spinach in my smoothies again because that was terrible. So that's it. So we had an extended Morning Joe today. I will be on Tuesday. We'll have some announcements to make about new members joining the Macros Inc. team. Hopefully by then we have some beta testing of the app, if Apple can get me my silly developer account. So that's it. I'm Dr. Brad. Happy Friday. We will see you guys all on Tuesday, which will be August, 11th, 12th, something like that. So I'll see you guys later, and I am out of here.